And welcome to another episode of Subscription Radio. I'm your host, DJ Fish, aka Ben Fisher. With me, I have a very special guest, Eric Gower. He's an author, an editor, a private chef, a teacher for cooking, as well as, and this is how I know him, the founder of Breakaway Matcha, which is a matcha tea that we'll get into. I'm sure Eric will kind of talk about a little bit around like the history of the business, but I know that it goes back to I think over a decade in Japan and sort of like this obsession that you developed around matcha and like people who are creating matcha, part of this, I guess, the creation process and just as I understand it, like the purpose behind your brand is really to make great matcha accessible to to the muggles, to me, to those of us who are who haven't experienced it before. And I
You
will
should
just
be
say, like
DJ,
Eric,
Muggle. What you should change.
exactly. And I love that. And I was going to say, like, and for context for everyone listening, Eric and I just now met for the very first time. And the way that I came across him and his brand was I was looking for teas on the internet and I came across Breakaway. And I just everything from the very first experience I had just going through the website, I got sucked into like taking a quiz to figure out what was the right matcha for me, and then I got curious and went into the story to read through just his background, and like I just had to reach out because a lot of, I guess, the entrepreneurs and founders and specifically in e-commerce that I really gravitate towards are folks who I feel like they've just really put a lot of thought into not just the product experience, but the experience on the website as well as just like the storytelling. So, anyways, without further ado, Eric, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be here, Ben. Thank you. I appreciate it too.
Um, awesome. Well, so maybe just like very briefly, like, are there any holes in that sort of initial preamble that you would like to add that you think is like important context? I know a lot of what I'd love to talk about is kind of the consumer experience, maybe a little bit of like how it's evolved, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. Well, just on like a 50,000 foot level, something to say about that, I would say. So yeah, one of the reasons I started this company was, in fact, as you said, to make really good matcha accessible. It was really hard to find. This has
Mm,
been a classic case of scratching one's own itch,
mm,
i.e., I'd spent almost 18 years in Japan living there. And I moved back to California, and I really loved matcha when I was there, and just drank a ton of it, and participated in a lot of tea ceremonies that my friends went through. I personally was never drawn to, doing the ceremony myself, but I love the product, love the tea, I love everything about it. Um, but so yeah, so I would basically make trips back to Japan and buy a couple of kilos for my own use, and I'd make it for my chef friends and stuff like that. And it turns out that one of the first places that bought it or just wanted to buy it on a regular basis was a place called the French Laundry. I don't know if you've ever
oh
heard of
yeah,
that
yeah,
restaurant.
yeah.
Yeah, it's considered like they're really highfalutin, fancy restaurant,
Hoity
one of the best.
toity.
Yeah, super hoity-toity. So I figured like if they wanted it, like something was happening here. It was a good thing. And but what I realized was in the end that wholesale was really not the way for at least for this particular business. I did manage to place the matcha in a whole bunch of Michelin starred restaurants. I think at one point we're up to like 40 Michelin stars or something of restaurants
Jeez.
that carried our matcha. But in the end, they didn't really buy that much matcha, and you'd think they would. Like you'd think it would be this kind of like ongoing thing where it's just they're just buying a lot. But it turns out there are just individuals throughout the world who are complete and utter matcha freaks, fanatics, who will buy 10x the amount that the French Laundry will, and you get this direct experience of dealing with the person who's actually consuming the product, and that's always been a huge part of our ethos. We talk to almost everybody who buys, and I write. And now my staff helps me do it, but I still do it during the sales. I write personal notes on every single order.
Mm,
It takes time, but it's amazing what that does. It's like Reid Hoffman once said.
hmm.
It's like do things that don't scale. And a lot of people who start a business, they just want to scale. They want to get really big, really quick, and they want to flip it and they want to sell it, and then who knows what, go relax in Ibiza. But I don't. I never really looked at it that way. It was always going to be like a long game for me. in the same way that matcha has been a long game in my own personal consumption.
Hmm.
But that all that aside, like the product aside, really, like when I say 50,000 feet level, what I mean is, um, while what we're selling is a physical product, it is green tea. It's remarkably high quality green tea that people seem to love. I think what we're really trying to communicate and what we're really trying to not even sell, but just trying to share is the idea of pausing in one's life.
Mm.
As Americans, we hustle quite a bit, and our schedules are pretty full. And I find that we don't leave a lot of time, in between things that we're doing. And if I could introduce a way to get people to slow down, even just a little bit, it has a great deal of value. And it also, I think, alleviates suffering. Like matcha and Zen Buddhism are just intimately linked. They
Mm.
were brought around to Japan in the same time, around the year 1100, from China, by a sort of wandering Japanese monk who was in China doing some studying, and he discovered both Zen Buddhism and matcha at the same time, brought them back, introduced it to Japanese style Zen Buddhism, or well, Buddhism wasn't even called that; it was just Buddhism, it wasn't Zen. And there's just this intimate connection between Zen Buddhism and matcha. And what is the purpose of Buddhism, or what is Buddhism? It's to alleviate suffering, right? And the
Mm.
world is full of suffering, and anything we can do to kind of alleviate it is a good thing. So, by creating a matcha habit, I suppose, or even just one-offs, any little bit of favor that you can do yourself, by putting something really good in your body and doing it a little bit slowly, is a good thing. And at the end of the day, I sleep really well, and I feel good about the product I'm selling and what I'm doing. So I guess there's that kind of like, big clarity up top, right?
Hmm.
If that makes sense.
No, it does. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm curious, going back to, I mean, so yeah, it seems like we talk about, even like in startups, like founder product fit.
Yes.
There's a really good, there seems to be a very
Cultural
good
fit.
match here. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned like the handwritten cards, but just like what is the sort of, what are the different, we'll call it like points of thoughtfulness that you've, or even like parts of the experience you've thought a lot about that someone might not even realize, like
Yeah.
a customer might not realize, without knowing, but that you think have really sort of enhanced the experience.
Oh yeah. No, most people are used to Amazon, right? It comes in a brown
Mm.
box with Amazon tape on it. You open it up, and there's usually an air pillow in there, right? With your product.
Uh-huh.
And it's a fairly low bar, like that's what most people are expecting. And
Uh-huh.
and we don't go like overboard. We still use, like, our mailing boxes are not, all tricked out and branded and everything. They're just really nice white boxes. And but when you open it up, that's when I think the kind of nice part comes in. Like, we just
Mm.
kind of care. We take a lot of time putting the stuff in. We design and order tissue paper that everything comes in. It's
Mm.
it's a little bit branded there, just the green dots. And everything. If people order a toolkit, for example, a toolkit is just like a frother and a sieve and a bamboo scoop. That comes in wrapped really in a lovely little flour sack towel that can be reused. Um, and the way that it's put together, it takes a while, and it's just nice to really receive these boxes, and then the note goes on top of that. And
Mm.
yeah, we get comments all the time about how people got happy opening the box. So it's
No,
kind of persuasion in a way, right? Like, if
mm-hmm.
your first impression is good like that, you're more likely to be positively receptive to the product, I believe. And it could
Mm-hmm.
go the other way too. Like, if it's too much, like some
Mm.
companies and subscription boxes, it's just too much. You know what I mean? Like, they've spent so much money on it, you could tell that,
Yeah,
geez,
like this is where
was
my
it
money's
worth
going.
going? You know,
Right. Yeah.
so it's kind of a balance, I think, between just really tricking it out to like an absurd level versus a heart forward level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's interesting. So you did refer to it as a subscription box. I'm curious, when you first, I mean, obviously when you first started the business, subscriptions weren't even, the
They were
subscription
not a thing.
mechanism wasn't a thing.
Well,
I
for
am
D2C
curious.
they weren't, but for other things they
Right.
were, right? Yeah,
For sure, right,
yeah,
but not for D2C.
yeah.
Like, has that always been how you envisioned this business? Because obviously, and I think I like in one of the interviews with you, you said like you have like I think it was like a 75% repeat purchose rate,
We do.
which
It's
is
about a
remarkable,
75.
right?
It's mind blowing, really. It's and we don't
Yeah.
advertise. It's just. Then again, because we're not that interested in like really super quick scale growth,
Mm-hmm.
it's so much more effective to let
Mm,
the customer make a cup for somebody who's enamored with it, right? And then you're like so far there already because you're not the one doing the selling, kind of like they are.
mm-hmm.
And that's like not feasible for a lot of businesses, particularly if you've taken venture money, for example. They don't
Mm.
they don't want that kind of behavior because they're looking for the quicker return, the quicker exit. So I've got no plans on exiting. It's a very long game. um for us it works really well.
Got it. Yeah. And is that, you said you don't do you not do any paid acquisition? It's entirely.
Right now we don't. I'm kind of open to it, but at the moment we don't do any. Yeah, and that might be some reason why the return rate is so high, right? Like if
Mm,
we just blanketed the
right.
airwaves with ads, and there are going to be people who just try it, don't like
Right.
it, whatever. They don't have much like skin in the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a filter there. Um,
Exactly. And it's a really
yeah.
like positive filter for us, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
slow filter, right?
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm curious, has growth accelerated for you over the years? Like even following this
No,
strategy? No.
no, it hasn't accelerated. We grew forever at about 20%. During COVID, it was higher because everybody's buying from home and they're looking for things that are good for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So COVID was a huge boon to the business for us, but and which some degree of guilt involved in that. I don't know why, but there is.
Mm,
But like all these people suffering, and then but they're all buying matcha. Um, it's yeah, but yeah, it 20% is plenty of growth,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, geez, if you're not happy with that, I mean, you might have a different set of problems.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, like, and even in, like, if you're willing to share this, is like, what percentage roughly of your customers are just buying it a la carte and versus are on a like an automatic renewal subscription program? I'm just
30,
curious.
about a third are subscription and two-thirds are a la
Mm-hmm.
carte. But the a la carte is kind of complicated. It's not just random a la carte. So once a month, I write a letter. It has nothing to do with matcha. It's more of these ideas of like pausing and a lot
Hmm.
about meditation and so a lot of our customers are very interested in that. So I write the letter about that, and then that's sort of the top half of the letter, and then the bottom half of the letter, it's like, hey, the blend 94 is drinking pretty well this month. If you haven't tried it, I really recommend you try
Mm,
it. And everything is 20% off, and we do that for a week. So
okay.
25% of the time everything is 20% off. The other
Mm-hmm.
75% is not. And so a lot of the people who aren't on subscription will just wait for that sale
Right.
and get whatever they want. It's usually something different, or although people do have their favorite teas, and they stick with that. There's a elderly woman. She's in her 80s in Maine who I don't know how she does this, but she drinks a kilo a month. That's a
Oh my
thousand
goodness.
servings. 1,000 servings of matcha a month. That's 33 a day, right?
She must have a lot of cats. I
It's
mean,
insane. And there are other people who are similar. Like yeah, we call them the DEF CON matcha people. Like it's just some will make a 5 gram serving like really really thick because they want all
uh-huh.
the wakefulness and the benefits and all that. They just they go off label, let's say, right? They off label
Right.
uses. Um, so people get it for all kinds of reasons, and it's fun to ask why, because again, I'm writing notes, and you get to talk to anybody you want. I'll just pick up the phone and call people. It's like, how in the world are you using so much matcha? What are you doing? Like, so I get a lot of feedback, a lot
That's
of
awesome.
intel from customers.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously, so I'm curious, based off that feedback, like what has changed about your product or the way you've approached the business based off of what you've been learning?
Learning about, you mean as we go?
Yeah,
You
like
mean?
in speaking to like in speaking to your like your customers, right? Like the woman in Maine would be like a great
Yeah,
example where I'm sure, well, a there it's just astounding that she
it is.
can consume that much, but like just
Yes.
getting into as I think you alluded to, is like understanding the motivations and sort of like what the intent behind your
Yeah.
customers. I'm curious, how
Yeah.
has that evolved even your own understanding of the product you're selling?
I mean, it's as you'd expect. People do different things for different reasons, and
Yeah.
patterns do emerge. I mean, there one clear pattern is um, a lot of people want to stop drinking coffee,
Mm.
and that's how a lot of people find us. Like, if you just Google like caffeine matcha coffee or something like that, I think we pop up
Uh-huh.
at number one. Like, there's a
Oh,
lot of
interesting.
deep content on that on the website. So a lot of
Hmm.
people come, via that door, and personally, I myself love coffee. I drink quite a bit of coffee. I drink a ton of matcha
Hmm.
as well, but you can do both if your body can handle both. But some people's bodies can't
Right.
handle both. So there's other learnings. It took a while to learn kind of what we were chatting about before we started recording. Um, a lot of people want lattes. They just do. And in
Mm.
the beginning, when I started Breakaway Matcha, we didn't offer any kind of like culinary matcha which would be appropriate for lattes, in the belief that we wanted to go so hyper niche, young growth only, no, really radical about it, like no milk, no sugar, no nothing. This is the way you drink this stuff, and that has an appeal for a lot of people, but a lot of people were using milk anyway for that. And so I
Hmm.
was think I would just tell them, all right, I'm going to send you a different matcha. If you're going to drink it with milk, I'm going to send you a different, because it's going to improve your experience. Because if you use a slightly cheaper matcha, or when I say cheaper, it's really like the leaves come from lower on the plant. They're older leaves. They have more molecular complexity. There's just more going on with them. Whereas, the hyper premium stuff that we're known for, it's the youngest leaves, and it's really kind of like subtle and beautiful and ethereal. And if you add milk and sugar to that, it really dilutes the experience. It doesn't taste like
Hmm.
much. So I was trying to, if they're going to drink with milk, I wanted to give them the right matcha for that milk. So we
Hmm.
sourced some really good stuff that was, I think, perfect for that. We call it the culinary reserve, and it's a lot cheaper. It can be, as cheap as 10 times cheaper than our most expensive one, and better.
Yeah.
Like, it's a better product for that application, right? So again, the end goal is to make the customer, give them what they're looking for, not
Yeah.
to dogmatically tell them how to do it. Although there is something behind that too. I don't know if you remember, there's a wonderful company, a coffee company called the Handsome Roasting Coffee Company. It was in LA.
No.
It was like these three burly guys. They had mustaches. They're all buffed out, and they had a very interesting approach that's related to what we're talking about. So it's the same thing. They did not allow their customers to have milk
Uh-huh.
or sugar in their coffee. They would just point them down the street. There are 80 different cafes where you can get that. This is what you get here,
They'd
right?
like take it away out of
Runs
your
out the door.
hands if you asked
No,
for
they didn't offer
it.
it. They just
Yeah.
wasn't on the menu. It wasn't on the menu, nor
Yeah.
was it available to add yourself, right?
Right.
And Blue Bottle wound up buying them, you know. So that was
Oh man.
interesting. Yeah. So there's, as they say,
I wonder if they still don't have it.
well, no, Blue Bottle offers it. That's for sure. Yeah, they just
Oh,
sneak
for
it up.
sure they do. Yeah.
They had,
Yeah.
they had these hardcore customers, right? Like, who knew
Hmm.
what they wanted, and they were happy
Hmm.
to be distinguished in that way. And as they say, like, the riches are in the niches. That was a hyper niche, and ours was a hyper niche too, and it still is. I mean, hyper premium matcha is about as hyper niche as it gets, really. But one other thing I added that I learned along the way was that a lot of people, particularly men, for interesting reasons, were drinking it cold. They were just foregoing the
Hmm.
heating process altogether, drinking it cold, and they were just like, adding ice to it. They were doing all kinds of weird ways of making it. And then so we developed a whole cold brew matcha, which has now become our best seller. So our cold brew original is actually our best selling matcha. It's wonderful in hot weather. Basically, you just take like a mason jar, fill it with ice
Hmm.
water, and a teaspoon of matcha in there, shake it like a martini, and quaff it down. It's really, really refreshing. Like it does something to your throat. Like you feel good afterwards. Your thirst is slaked, and it's just good, And it's very low fuss. There's none of the ceremonial aspects, and there's none of that. It's just like, water bottle, add matcha, shake, done. So we wanted to make good matcha for those people too. So we did, and so basically we created three categories. There's the culinary, meant for for culinary applications. You can bake with it. You've seen a lot of like matcha
Hmm.
desserts, right? That would be the matcha used for that. It's also good for lattes because you're adding milk and other things. It's like flour, basically, right? Like it's an ingredient that we would use not to drink on its own. You don't eat flour on its own. You mix it with eggs and sugar and make stuff with it, and that's the type of matcha you need for that. It's again, it's lower on the plant. These are older leaves. They have much more yield when you harvest them. They're heavier because they're older, so you get more matcha, right, with harvest. And yeah, it's an appropriate use of that matcha, right? So
Got it.
yeah.
And what were the two other categories? So you're saying
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
culinary. Yeah, yeah.
and cold brew. Cold
Hmm.
brew is the other one, and hyper premium is the other one. And we have
Got it.
18 total. 12 of them are hyper premium. We have 12 grades of hyper premium. We have 3 grades of cold brew, and we have 3 grades of culinary.
Got it. I'm curious, and what's the spectrum on pricing there, right? Like, because you were saying like the low, we'll
Yeah,
call it low quality versus
yeah.
hyper premium.
Uh,
What's that spread?
uh, I guess it's 35x. So 20 cents for a serving versus $7 for a serving.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
it's a big spread. But even that, like, here's one thing I'll say about that. It sounds like a lot. Like, who would pay $7 for a tea? Well, a lot of people would. I mean, it's an amazing thing to offer such a product because A, it's rare. B, it's just like surreally delicious. C, it's really good for you. I mean, $7. You go into a bar nowadays, a cocktail's like $18. I don't know where you live.
Yeah,
In San Francisco, cocktails are
yeah,
$18. A
yeah. I'm in
beer
New
is
York City, so that's
oh
normal.
god, it's even worse.
I'm
Yeah,
in Manhattan. Yeah,
yeah, it's even worse for you then. What can you buy for $7? Even appetizers, like nothing is $7 anymore. So a serving
no,
of like some of the world's greatest tea for $7, if you frame it that way, it's not expensive. Now it might be expensive compared to a 500 pack of Lipton bags, right? Which you can
hmm
go to the supermarket and pick up. Those are only a nickel or whatever, right? But that's a whole different like mental landscape that you have to go from Lipton to this, you know.
got it. One thing I'm curious about, even going into like the way that you've thought about, we'll call it like the blending of the commercial and entrepreneurial aspect of what you're doing versus the mission based piece.
Yes.
Like, has it have there been challenges in sort of reconciling the two, or has it been, I don't know enough about, we'll call it like the business model around
Mhm.
matcha tea, and maybe like the margins just work out, but have you had or may had to make decisions around just trying to make sure that you're pairing enough with like the commercial side of like upsells and cross sells, as opposed to just
Cardhook.
focusing, like how do you think about that? Yeah.
Cardhook helps us there, Ben.
Oh. Fair enough, fair enough. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how I think about it. Like, there's undoubtedly many things we could be doing that we're not doing that would probably help us. It's it's one of those. I don't know. Maybe I'm uh, a low shooting founder. I'm not sure, but I think that like once you have your sweet spot. I mean, there are many
Mhm.
philosophers have said like, the secret to being happy is wanting what you already have. you
Mhm.
know, and I feel like I have a modest life, but it's a good life. I walk to work. There's no commute. I love the people I work with. We have a really wonderful environment inside. We all sort of cook for each other and bring lunches in and drinking matcha all day and writing notes and listening to good music.
So
And
you're
it's
not
just
in Zoom meetings. It sounds like this is actually in
like,
person. You're like, were,
so
were you guys? Yeah.
these are choices, like we could run it differently. We could really just go, just right to the wall and really, really scale this thing, I'm sure if I hired a guy to do it, I don't really have that much interest in doing it. I do want to continue to grow and serve people. I do want to do that, but not at the expense of my time and sanity.
Mm,
you know, so I think it's a question a lot of business owners don't really ask themselves. Like, what is the end game of this thing? Like, what are you trying to
mm-hmm,
do? You know,
mm-hmm,
what is good enough? Like, and um, and maybe being happy, a little happier with what you have, unless you have nothing, in which case you're very motivated to change that, right?
mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
was the case in the beginning. Like when I first started Breakaway Matcha, I had just had a baby, and before that, you had briefly mentioned I was in the food world. I was writing cookbooks. I wrote a column for the San Francisco Chronicle. I was teaching cooking privately. Once in a while I would do an event like a wedding or something like that for a friend. But it was hard living in a place like Marin County. You know, it's expensive. You know this living in New York City, but
Mm-hmm.
you got to make a living somehow. And it was just as a writer, it's just really freaking hard. It's hard. You can do it, but it's a schlep and it's hard. So that's when kind of matcha came along, and I was very motivated in those days to grow it. But by doing all these techniques that we've been talking about, by talking to every
Mm-hmm.
single person who bought it, figuring it out, writing notes, all these things, making the experience really something that they'd want to return to, because back to the idea of subscriptions. I mean, matcha is kind of like the absolute perfect product for a subscription because it's daily consumed, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, a lot of subscriptions like let me talk about some of the subscriptions that I have and that I feel are pretty good. Like I get a CSA. Do you know what that is? A community
No.
sponsored agriculture. It's a box of vegetables from
Okay.
local farm. Yeah, you can. We're blessed
Okay.
here
Cool.
in Northern California in that there are a lot of farms that offer these things. So instead of going to Safeway or the big supermarkets to buy your produce, you can get it directly from farmers. But it shows up in a box, and you never know what you're getting. It's whatever they have. I love this subscription. I mean, it's fabulous. It's $20 a week for these beautiful vegetables. I don't know how they do it. I wish they'd raise the prices. They really should. Um, uh, that's one that works for me. I also buy meat for subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big one called Butcher Box. Very,
I was gonna
very.
say, yeah, yeah.
And I did do that for a while. They do a good job. In the end, I wanted more local meat, so I went to something more local. But
Mm-hmm.
but they did a good job, and I learned a lot from subscriptions by using Butcher Box. And I can tell you what is a terrible subscription experience is when you think you're signing up for a single thing, but you've wound up buying a subscription, and then when you try to cancel it, it's hard. Like you have to
Hard.
contact support, and like it's just this crazy procedure they make you go through, thus guaranteeing, for me at least, that I will never use this company again,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're doing like that way. It's like the opposite. It's kind of like, can we get a one and done and like get that hamster wheel going enough for us to like sell out? I don't know whatever they're going to do, but it's not a long-term plan to act like that with your customers. You want to be on their side, right? Like you want
Yeah.
to look at business through them. This seems to me so basic, but a lot of people don't get it right.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously there's an inherent tension there, especially as you mentioned, if you've raised venture capital money or
Oh,
depending on what your goals are, right? But um, there's something interesting where, like, as a consumer, and this is like my own experience is what, at least early on, is what I informed a lot of my own investigation around. Was just like, there are situations where, like, I love the idea of set it and forget it.
yeah,
The reality of set it and forget it is oftentimes, well, it's convenient up to a point, and then, like, but life happens, like or even you're like, okay, I'm going to try to cancel, and it creates work. It's kind of
yeah,
like finding that place where there's there's work and having to remember to buy something. So that is
yes,
like not that's
deliberate,
not ideal either,
right,
right? And
right,
but then there's also situations where, like, if you're getting on something on autopilot and your
hmm,
consumption will varies. And I mean, it's great with matcha because presumably it's actually measured. Like a lot of coffee
yes,
companies who do subscription, it's not measured. You're like kind of pouring it and like looking at it, or people are trying to quit caffeine for a bit. So like
right,
consumption will vary.
hmm,
But
hmm,
it's really sort of the experience breaks down in a bunch of different moments. And it really is about these like different inflection moments of like you're excited when you first get it, and
Yeah,
then like there's this opportunity to find out if someone needs more. And so it's just really interesting to understand how different operators and
yeah,
owners are thinking about that experience, because I talk
yeah.
to a lot of even subscription brands and I ask the founder, what subscriptions do you have? And I'm not kidding, they have none. And like, our entire conversation at that point had been like how important the subscription experience,
Yeah.
or
It's
how
like, why
important the
don't you have
subscription
one?
was. And I'm like,
Right.
well, what does that tell you? And I think it's just that like this type of stuff is nuanced, right? It's a design problem, and it's like
It is. It's very
subscriptions are
much a design
great.
problem.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it
Yeah.
is. It's a design problem. And I think you can create better design by like there's also a point of like too much communication. There's a fine line
Mm-hmm.
between the right amount of communication and too much, and also not
Yeah.
enough, right? But you want people to have the right amount. You want it to work for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it's not working for them, it's not good for them. It's not a good subscription for them. So I often will just ask people, what works for you? Like what would be an
Mm-hmm.
ideal subscription? And they say like, I'll go through 100 grams of matcha every 2 months, and we can dial that in. Like that's what it is. It's every two
Mm-hmm.
months, you know. And if like you said, life happens. They have family emergencies, whatever it is. They move. People shit happens, right? It should
Mm-hmm.
be really, really easy with one click to either pause it. That's ideal to just pause it, right? Because you're not off the radar at that point. You're just pausing it. But if they
Mm-hmm.
know, hey, the matcha is not for me, I don't really like it, then they're out of there. It should be an easy cancel. I don't want them as a customer if they're not getting a lot of value out of it.
Value.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like even going back to when I first like went to your site, and like the quiz is there. Is picking the right matcha, if you've never had matcha before, picking a matcha, is that one of the hard decisions? I would imagine that's like a
Really?
barrier for someone first purchasing,
Yes.
because I know nothing
Absolutely.
about matcha.
Yeah. And it's also a big paradox of choice. 18
Right.
grades of matcha, like what? That's kind of
Uh-huh.
crazy. It flies in the face of like a lot of good design, which might give you three choices, A, B, or C,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you outline the good and bad things about the three, and you pick the one of the three. But 18,
Yeah.
so the quiz is kind of designed like, well, do you enjoy it warm or cold, right? That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like one algorithm that kind of divides. Do you like to cook with it? Do you ever
Mm-hmm.
add anything to it? Do you like it ceremonial style, i.e., just like do you like ritual? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you try to come up with questions that would hone in on what it is they want, and then using the algorithm, you make a suggestion. That's how that works. So yeah, that the quiz has helped. Yeah, I think 100,000 people have taken it or something. There's a lot of people,
Oh wow.
uh, and we've learned quite a bit from it.
And
um,
do they end up with one of the 18, or is there really sort of like a few different buckets of matchas that someone just ends up at?
yeah, I mean, if it's clear they're looking for to cook with it, then they've got three
Mm,
choices at that point. And we
got it.
usually recommend instruct the engine to recommend the least expensive one. Like this is another thing that I do. I'm constantly trying to talk people down about how much they spend. Again, it's like do things that don't scale. But you'd be amazed what that does for people. Like they're
Hmm.
not used to like companies trying to talk them down and I don't do it as a technique. I try to genuinely figure out, what it is that would make them happiest. And maybe the cheapest one will make them happiest. And if that's the case, it's a win-win because they got this product they love at a price they love, and that's part of the 75% return figure, right, that we talked about.
Hmm.
Now, people who are more experimental, then they'll get a slightly different treatment. Like if they're ordering a bunch of hyper premium matchas, um, we might recommend a more expensive one because they're just into it, and we'll tell them why. Um, but but in general, particularly for new people, I always steer them as down as I can take them.
Hmm. That's awesome. Are there any experiences, like even brand experiences? And I would imagine with your background in like in cooking, that maybe it's even restaurant experiences. Are there brand experiences that have inspired you in just the way that you think about designing experiences? Um, yeah, with Breakaway.
Oh God, I'd have to think about that.
Did
it's a
French
totally
Laundry
weird.
inspire
Well,
you?
no, not really. No, like yeah, I think that era kind of like white tablecloths, and it had a few decades of its moment. I'm not sure that's a thing anymore. I mean, it is among a very small elite group, but it one thing, it's not at all related to anything we're talking about, but
Hmm.
I'm since way back, I've spent a ton of time trying to understand not cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin only, Bitcoin in particular. And so
Hmm.
I've spent, I don't know, a couple thousand hours studying Bitcoin, and that space is very interesting. Like for just in branding in general, like
Hmm.
some of the people who one of the exchanges, it's called River.
Hmm.
Um, Talk about a beautiful UX experience branding. It's really nice. I would send people to River. It's a great experience. As far as like food, I don't know. No, I'm so focused like on the hyper local. Like we're blessed with such good markets around here that
Hmm.
everything is just like grown locally, and there's really not a lot of branding. I mean, the farms kind of have some brands, but not really. Um, yeah, and even wines. Um, No, I don't. I can't think of it. If you gave me some time, if we want to revisit this,
Yeah,
I can have a list.
yeah. No, I'm curious, and yeah, it'd be great to just as you think about it and let it percolate in your brain,
Absolutely. I'll write it down. Make
because
sure you.
like for all of us, it's like we're influenced so much by the experiences we have, the good and the bad. Like maybe it's even
Totally.
bad experiences you've had. I mean, you gave a great example, which was it was so freaking difficult to cancel that subscription that you were
Yeah.
talking about, where
Yeah.
you're probably hyper aware of that as you run your
Yes.
business. Where you're like, well, that's the
These are
opposite of what I want, right?
these are the learnings, right? That's why. I
Yeah,
mean, if you're in the subscription business, you probably should get some subscriptions, right?
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and take note of the things that are great and
Yeah.
aren't.
Yeah.
I
I
I,
mean,
I have
Amazon is
this.
kind of the king of subscriptions in many ways. I mean, like, we use
Hmm.
a lot of packing tape that we buy from Amazon, and that's on
Hmm.
subscription. We've dialed in exactly how much we use, and boom, it shows up, and it's automated, and I never want to think about it again. And that's a perfect example of a subscription that really works. I don't want to think about tape, you but there it is. It shows up.
I mean, what's interesting about Amazon though, and I had I think someone else I had on the show that it was a private conversation. I think my life now kind of blends. I don't remember which conversations I have publicly versus privately, but
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend, and he had remarked that he's like, "Why would I buy a subscription when there's 2-day delivery?" He's like, "As soon as I need it, I basically get it."
Yeah. I mean, there's
Which
that.
was was an interesting comment. I still have subscriptions, but I think that was an interesting thing, especially as you get to same day delivery. Like
Yeah.
in my mind, a lot of the value of back to design is like as a person, there's so much stuff that I have to do. I just don't want to think about it, right?
Totally.
Like
Me
it's
too. The more I can
like
automate, the
I just
happier.
don't want to be worrying about like I eat the same meal every day, and I have for like 9 years
What's the
for
meal?
lunch and for dinner. So it has evolved. Like but it used to be a Chipotle double chicken burrito bowl.
Oh, I know
Um,
another guy who does the exact same thing.
really?
Yes, this guy Tyler. You ever heard of him? His whole thing. He eats every single meal at Chipotle. Every
Yeah,
single one.
yeah, yeah. No, really good food. It's like Whole Foods,
That's
and
what he said.
I had hired a nutritionist to kind of do some. At the time, I was like really into fitness, and so I was looking at sort of two things. One of which was portion control of understanding. Hey, I have these fitness goals, so I
Mhm,
had a trainer, and I was like,
mhm.
all right, I'm relying on the trainer to give me like instruction and advice about what things to do, and then I'm talking to the nutritionist around like, all right, these are the macros I need in order to have basically to reach my goal, my fitness goals. Like this is the food I need to eat. I was just like,
Mhm.
I want you folks to figure this out because it's not what I want to spend my time doing.
Nice.
And I guess I am graced in that, like, I don't need an enormous amount of, I'm not a foodie. Like, I'll obviously eat out.
You enjoy it, yeah,
But
but
like, I don't
you don't care.
like,
You don't
I
care.
don't care. And as
Yeah,
long as it tastes good. And so once I
yeah.
find something I like, I'll eat it on repeat. And so
It's
what was
great.
great for me was it was like, I had my goal and then I outsourced the solution. And then my responsibility was to follow the protocol. And
Yeah,
so, I think
I like it.
that to
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
some people think
totally
it's insane, but
think so. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, the great thing
yeah,
is you get to make that call. It's your life. You know what I mean? It works for you.
100%.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer in automation, like just, going above the idea of subscription for a moment, but just the whole idea of
Hmm.
automation. Have you been
Yeah.
following the chat GBT? If
Yeah,
you
oh yeah.
use it at all? There's something
Yes, I
called
use it a lot.
auto chat
Yeah, Auto
GPT.
GPT. Yep, I've used that.
That
Yep.
is
Yeah.
powerful, powerful, powerful stuff.
Where you
This
can
is
create
as big a leap.
agents.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
as big a leap as the internet was. I think. I really do.
Yeah. No, it's
So
I mean, it's fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So that the whole idea of like automating parts of your life that you want to automate is a
Right.
beautiful thing. It's cool.
And I think to your point, it's really about being able to to have the freedom to choose what areas you want to be selective about focusing on
Hmm.
and caring about.
Yeah.
So for some people, it might be shit. I want the time to be able to focus on what I want to eat. I want to have the time to cook and create those meals. What I
Oh, me
don't want to
too.
do is I don't have to worry about other stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I get
It's
it.
about
I
being
get it.
able to pick.
I get a great deal of
Yeah.
joy out of like getting that box of vegetables and figuring out what I'm going to do with
Yeah.
it and chopping it. And like, these are all opportunities for mindfulness for me, where it's just
Yeah.
slowing down and being one with the veggies. See, we talk this
100%.
way in Marin County, Ben. You don't talk that way in New York.
We don't. Although, yeah, I grew up on a tree farm in Maine, so I had sheep and stuff, and yeah, like it was wild. My life is quite the evolution. It's funny when you referenced Maine earlier. I was like, yeah, I might know them or know her.
You
Um,
might.
yeah, no, but I really, I mean, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness on this and stuff. And one question I always like to ask people who come on the show are, do you have a big ask? Like, is there something that would change or transform your life or your business that you could put out into the ether?
At first, I thought you said, "Do I have a big ass?" I was going to say, "Geez, I hope not." I was going to say, "Ben, we don't know each other that well." Um, um, I don't really have a big ask. I don't think. If I did, I mean, the world. It sounds trite, and it's more Marin County stuff, maybe, but the world would be a much better place if we all just kind of like were happier, with wanted what we have. I said that a couple times in
Hmm.
this talk, but striving is a good thing. Ambition is good. It's the art of kind of like blending your striving and your ambition with it being good enough, you know
Yeah,
and I think there's beauty in that. I think there's power in that, and there's certainly peace in that. And if I could help people do that in even the smallest way, I consider it a life, pretty well lived. And in the end, that's all we can do anyway. Like, I once had this kind of like wise friend who told me, he said, "Put your hand in front of your face like this." I'm like, "All right." He said,
hmm,
"Now, everything on this side of your hand you can control, and everything on this side of your hand you can't control." So,
hmm.
if when you think about it in those terms, like it's there's very little we can do, really. We don't have that much control on earth. We can control what we put in our bodies, to some extent, how we think and how we live, but even that, I mean, there's a whole argument for free will that goes very much against that. But oh, I just, speaking of free will, I mean, talking about free association, there's a wonderful branding experience by the thinker and neuroscientist Sam Harris, called the
Oh
Waking
yeah,
Up. Yeah, it's called the Waking Up app. It's a fabulous branding experience. It's really, really good.
I'll
How
check
he's
that out.
organized it, and there's no commercial anything behind it. He gives away free subscriptions, but normally they're $15 a month. But if you write them, he'll give you a year for free. He just wants people to use it. But it's got, I don't know, a million users at $15 a month or something. So the guy's making major bank. I
Yeah,
mean, and he's a brilliant thinker and speaker and meditation teacher. But if you look at that app, it really takes you through in this very compelling way, how to slow down your thoughts and I don't know. It's not like any other meditation app on the market at all. It's very different.
that's fascinating. I've been using
Yeah.
it's called a Insight Timer, which
Oh yeah, sure. I
which
know
is
what
really,
that is.
it's yeah, and so a lot of it's around like breathing, which for
Yeah.
me is something I've become what's actually be funny is you have no context about this, but the episode that we released, I think 2 days ago, was really about my we took a bit of a deviation where I did like a bit of a monologue and I talked about my experience with anxiety and specifically
Oh, nice.
performance anxiety as an
Mhm.
entrepreneur. Um, and so this conversation will be a really nice and really strangely timed compliment to that, because everything that you were talking about around like call it great like gratitude and thankfulness for your
I know.
experiences,
Yeah.
I'd say those are hard things, especially I can just speak for myself personally, like moving to New York City and having so much like there are all these things I want to do with my life, and this is what success looks like, and you
Yeah.
get so, and even culturally, obviously, we
You walk
subscribe to
up.
a lot of
Yeah.
this. You're near San Francisco, right? It's like it's it's
Yeah.
interesting, especially hearing your language around how you talk about I will like your ambition around the brand and around your business, and how you've really taken this call it different tact, and you have the ability to, um,
Yes.
which like it's what was funny too. There were several moments where you mentioned things that you did that were sort of like, yeah, like if you had just raised VC money, you wouldn't do this. But the consequence, or not, the side effect of doing it that way is actually it led to a healthier relationship with your customer and
That's
more
right.
cultivated loyalty. And
And a
like
better
there are
business
these sort of like, yeah,
if you're
yeah, it's
satisfied with slow, right? Like if you know it's going to take
right,
a while, and if you're okay with that, it's a vastly better way.
yeah,
People respond to
uh,
it too. You can tell, like if you could tell which companies are VC funded just by kind of like the websites and the packaging and the flows you get. Like the email flows that you get on if you sign up for something,
hmm
and everything feels really like packaged and best practices and all that. But if you can, I don't know, somehow step outside of that and not need to do that, it's a
hmm
really super effective way to do it. But it's
yeah.
you're not going to keep your VC people happy doing it this way because 10 years later, you're still schlepping tea. You're just doing more of it, but it's
Yeah.
slower. Yeah, slowness is
Well,
not a
and
bad thing.
I mean, and there is the argument of, you're if you truly have a great product. And I think that comes back to having a great product that if you're helping people, you're doing arguably a disservice in not sharing
Or not
more
more.
widely what you've created, right?
Arguably,
Which
yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I get how that's also very like also like self I don't even know what the
Serving.
expression would be.
Yeah,
Basically like yeah,
self-serving.
self-serving.
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. But that was I think an early thing that was told to me when I had sort of almost like a natural aversion to sales, because my
Mm.
background's in design and in creating stuff, and that really is my identity that I associate with. And uh, I will say, right or wrong, someone saying that to me, I was a bit like it was a bit of a mental shift too, where I was like, yeah, if I know I'm helping people, then I'm not doing anyone a service by keeping quiet, right?
Right.
And obviously
Right.
there's a balance there. There's a
Yeah.
balance.
I mean, you're not
Um,
intentionally keeping quiet, I don't think. It's just like you're
yeah,
just not buying the Shopify app megaphone thing or whatever they're selling.
right, right. Oh man. Well, I
Uh,
know we kind of just we certainly went around a bunch of different paths on this, but I really appreciate you so much coming on the show and sharing
oh, it's
about
my pleasure. Fun talking
like
to you.
yeah. Um, well, thank you so much everyone, and this was another episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.